A homeless, unemployed drifter from Colorado named George Nada travels across the United States in search of a place under the sun. That's how he ends up in Los Angeles, with its towering skyscrapers and great opportunities. He goes to an employment office to find formal work. A large crowd has gathered there, all seeking jobs. George has an interview and tells the staffer about his difficult situation back home. Many businesses had suddenly closed, leaving people jobless. The woman listens without much interest and tells him he doesn't have enough experience. George smiles in disappointment and leaves the employment center. He wanders aimlessly through the city streets until he encounters a preacher and stops to listen. The preacher passionately tells a small group of onlookers that demons have captured the minds of the ruling class on Earth, controlling ordinary people through them. He urges listeners to wake up and free themselves from the control of the dominant elites. Spotting a police car, Nada decides to move on. Along the way, he sees a strange man, almost hypnotized, staring at a meaningless advertisement on a storefront television. Nada pays it little mind and continues walking. Eventually, he finds a temporary shelter for the homeless and plans to spend the night there. Next door, a woman sits entranced, watching a TV show about a narcissistic star who believes she will never age. George, tired, reclines in his chair and sighs deeply, lost in thought. The next day, George visits a construction site and tries to get hired as a laborer. At first, the foreman refuses because they only accept union members, but George makes a persuasive case. The foreman negotiates a wage, and George is hired. He begins to work hard, sweating under the sun. Although his employment issue is solved, he will only get paid in a few days, and he still has no place to stay that night. One of the workers, named Frank, notices the frustrated newcomer and offers to show him a place with food and a hot shower. Suspicious at first, Nada eventually follows him. On the way, they chat and begin to form a friendship. Frank leads the drifter to a camp where friendly residents, also drawn to Los Angeles from various parts of the world in search of fortune, support one another. Even the children feel at ease there. A local man named Gilbert immediately gives George a task to make the camp more welcoming. It's lunchtime, and George is served a generous helping of hearty food. During the meal, Frank shares his own story. Like George, he moved to another city to support his family back in Detroit. He's furious at the local elites who fatten their pockets and shut down nearly all the factories in his hometown, leaving hundreds jobless. He's lost all patience and is ready to take drastic action if another plant closes. Frank believes the lower classes must fight to survive, and he jokingly warns George that he's prepared to compete with him for a place under the sun. George, more optimistic, is determined to work hard and build his life from scratch. That night, Nada strolls through the camp and notices some residents watching an enthusiastic TV commercial about false nails. Suddenly, the broadcast is interrupted, and on the screen appears a distressed man claiming that everyone lives in an artificially constructed world. According to him, a group of unknown creatures emits a special signal toward Earth that puts people into a trance and deprives them of critical thought. Poverty is rising, and racial injustice is increasing because aliens have brainwashed people to be indifferent to everything except their own benefit. The camp residents ignore this alarming message, complaining only of headaches before switching back to the baseball game. George notes a blind priest nearby repeating every word of the broadcast. Gilbert rushes toward the priest. Although George cannot hear their conversation, he deduces they are discussing something secret. Gilbert leads the elderly man into the camp's church, which arouses George's suspicions. They must be hiding something. The next morning, Nada meets Gilbert at the camp entrance and asks about his nocturnal visit to the church. Gilbert explains the church offers a community kitchen for the homeless, and he had stayed overnight to prepare it. He also mentions he sings in the church choir and that rehearsal is about to start. The strange man from the TV broadcast appears again on the screen, urging viewers to stop the hypnotic signal immediately. Once more, the broadcast triggers severe headaches, and the residents sigh in relief when the channel returns to the baseball game. Anxious, Gilbert hurries back to the church. This time, George decides to follow. Inside, he can hear the choir singing and figures he won't be noticed if he enters. He discovers a mini chemical laboratory and a mysterious inscription on the wall. They live, we sleep. Nearby, a tape recorder blasts the choir's hymn to mask the noise of a secret meeting happening in the adjoining room. There, Gilbert, the TV preacher, and other members of the secret group plot to hijack the broadcast again to reach a larger audience. Their goal is to recruit as many people as possible to spread their message more effectively. Overhearing them, George steps back and accidentally stumbles against a hidden vault filled with crates. He decides to leave the mystery for later, closes the vault, and is about to leave when he encounters the blind priest. The priest feels George's face and hands, then immediately recognizes him as the new laborer. Without hesitation, he begins preaching to him about revolution. Unnerved, George bolts from the church. The preacher shouts that he will return. A police helicopter appears overhead, rattling the church's occupants. Soon it flies off, and George borrows binoculars from a teenager to watch what happens next. Gilbert and his accomplices load crates into a car. George spots them, but Frank advises him not to interfere. He doesn't want trouble. Meanwhile, George's surveillance is cut short when the camp and church are suddenly surrounded by police. The residents, confused about their crime, watch in silence. Then the police, with excavators, start demolishing the camp's tents and trailers. Residents flee in panic. Horrified, George watches as law enforcement mercilessly destroys the lives of good people. The officers capture the priest and the TV preacher, beating them until they die. Anyone who can't escape meets the same brutal fate. George can't save those already taken, but rescues a terrified teenager hiding in a corner. George and the boy flee to the church's upper floor. Wandering the corridors, they find a room where other survivors have taken refuge. None understands why they've been attacked. They spend the night hiding. The next morning, they venture out to inspect the camp's aftermath. The area looks as though a hurricane passed through, yet they find a TV still standing in the rubble, broadcasting comedic commercials. Meanwhile, George decides to investigate the church's vault. The provocative inscription on the wall, once covered during the raid, is revealed again. He locates a lone crate identical to those taken by Gilbert. Inside are dozens of sunglasses. George discards the box in a trash bin but pockets a pair. Walking through the city, he puts them on. Everything around him turns black and white. The once familiar world appears entirely different. Every billboard, sign, and headline now reads commands like obey, marry, reproduce, consume, watch TV, don't think. Shiny magazine images are replaced by manipulative slogans and calls for submission. People who seemed ordinary now reveal monstrous alien faces. George takes them off, then puts them back on to be sure. The man in front of him really looks like a creature. The stranger eyes George suspiciously, but does nothing. George looks up and sees the words, "This is your God," stamped on dollar bills. He also spots transmitters on every traffic light, emitting a hypnotic voice repeating orders. Realizing not all humans are the same, George watches as ordinary people casually converse with monster aliens. He understands that the monsters are the most successful in society. Entering a supermarket, he sees a politician on TV who, without the glasses, looks human. Through them, he's an alien. Overcome, George laughs hysterically, then insults a woman who bumps into him. She, too, appears alien. When he tries to warn others, he only exposes himself. The woman alerts her fellow aliens via a communicator on her wristwatch. Alien officers dressed as police immediately seize him and question where he got the glasses. He refuses to tell. They threaten him, urging him to join their ranks, but he resists, knocking them out, seizing their weapons and disposing of them. Soon, police cars swarm the street. George hides in a bank only to find half the customers are aliens. Fueled by adrenaline, he opens fire on the hidden aliens. One calls for backup and vanishes. George shoots down a drone, then escapes to a locked garage. There he meets Holly, a beautiful woman whom he confirms is human. Desperate, he forces her to drive him to her home, his only chance to evade his pursuers. At her place, he collapses and tries to explain. His world is in danger, controlled by evil creatures. He asks Holly to wear the glasses so she can see for herself, but she refuses and doesn't believe him. When he closes his eyes briefly, she sneaks up and smashes a bottle over his head, then pushes him through a second-story window. Miraculously surviving the fall but losing the glasses, George is forced to flee again. He hides under a bridge and spends the night on the streets. The next day, he returns to the construction site, begging Frank for help in his fight against the alien creatures. Frank, terrified by George's mass shooting, refuses to listen and tells him to stay away. Soon, George goes back to the trash bin, where he dumped the crate of glasses, but it's empty. He spots a garbage truck nearby, climbs aboard, and rummages through the debris, finding a few remaining pairs. Frank accidentally witnesses George's dumpster dive. He gives George his wages and says he can no longer help. George insists he try a pair of the glasses, but Frank won't, thinking George is insane. Frustrated, George hits him, and they get into a fierce fight. In the end, George knocks Frank down and forces him to wear the glasses. Horrified, Frank finally believes. Shaken by reality, the friends rent a room in a nearby motel and discuss their next move. Frank speculates that others must also see the aliens, and they must find them. George shares his childhood story. Born into extreme poverty, abused by his father, and constantly witnessing social injustice, hatred the aliens exploited for years. Now, George vows vengeance for his shattered life. The next morning, they meet Gilbert at the motel. He's wearing the glasses too. He invites them to a secret meeting of like-minded individuals that very night. Following the indicated address, they meet others of all ages who exchange their glasses for modern, safer lenses that provide a clearer image. Gilbert explains who the invaders are, recruiting ordinary humans for wealth and power in exchange for loyalty. To the aliens, Earth is just a business and temporary resource source. Global catastrophes and climate change are their doing. Once Earth's resources are exhausted, they'll move on to enslave other worlds. One resistance member shows Frank an alien watch, which they decide to keep. They haven't deciphered the device's code that lets aliens travel freely through space and communicate among themselves. Gilbert rallies everyone, saying they don't yet have enough fighters for a massive assault, but they're determined to act. First, they must locate and sabotage the signal's source to awaken humanity. Nervous Holly, who turns up at the meeting, fidgets with George's glasses and apologizes for her earlier betrayal. Their conversation is cut short by a sudden police raid. Most resistors are shot down while fleeing, but George, Frank, and Holly manage to escape unharmed. Heavily armed, the trio returns fire at the alien officers and hides in an alley. George wants to reach the conflict's epicenter to find Holly, but Frank stops him, urging them to figure out how the watch works, accidentally activating a portal to another world. Trapped between advancing police forces, they jump through the portal and find themselves in an underground alien base. Strange inscriptions cover the walls. Carefully proceeding down a corridor, they encounter an alien checkpoint manned by disguised officers who radio that their terrorist sweep is complete. Satisfied, the aliens depart to celebrate. George, Frank, and Holly slip past them, following sounds down the corridor to a banquet hall. There, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit praises the human-alien alliance, boasting of their soon-complete conquest of Earth and its great benefits for the human elite. The crowd erupts in applause. An old camp acquaintance, now allied with the invaders, assumes George and Frank have joined the winning side and is surprised to see them still dressed in rags. He offers them a tour of the base, taking them to an alien spaceport where aliens and human guys prepare for interplanetary travel. They then arrive at the television studio behind the operations control center, the global broadcast point for the hypnotic signal. George tricks his guide into letting them in, but guards demand special credentials. Refusing to back down, the friends draw their weapons and fight their way into the studio. A former colleague tries to persuade them to accept the aliens' rule, arguing that the invaders have enslaved the planet and that joining them offers power and prosperity. Unwilling to betray humanity, the traitor teleports away at the first opportunity. The friends storm the main office, interrogating employees, but learning nothing of Holly's whereabouts until they discover the hypnotic transmitter on the roof. Racing upward, they encounter Holly, who has survived by fighting aliens. Together, they reach the top floor, but Holly betrays them, shooting Frank in the head. As George approaches the rooftop antenna, she orders George to surrender at gunpoint. He refuses and shoots her, killing her instantly, then destroys the satellite dish. Immediately, alien-occupied helicopters open fire on him. As he's mortally wounded, George taunts the aliens with the middle finger. His sacrifice interrupts the signal, and humanity finally learns the shocking truth. Aliens have been hiding among us, broadcasting hypnotic programs, appearing in movies, dating us, even starting families. Thanks to a humble drifter from Colorado, the world awakes from its long slumber.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.